This week, can tech escape politics on Future Forward?
Then disinformation. Can we cut off the cash-fueling manipulative media?
And two big M&A deals this week. New York rings the cash register. I'm Stephen Rosebaum.
I'm Alexis Scordato. Let's launch.
Hey, Alexa.
Hey, Steve. How's it going?
You know, it's been a frothy week, for sure. All kinds of stuff to talk about. We have 3 chapters on today's show. Chapter 1 is politics. Chapter 2 is disinformation and ads. And Chapter 3 is M&A. And stay tuned for Chapter 3 because a bunch of surprises there. Even though it's the 3rd chapter, it's maybe the frothiest and most unheard of. And by the way, before we get into the show, 2 things. One, podcast listeners, we love when you rate us. Go into iTunes, like us, Spotify, share with your friends. And a huge thank you to our friends at IEEE Spectrum. They are amazing editorial partners, and we always have stories from them, and we will have Glenn back with us probably next week. Okay, so are we ready?
Election.
Yeah, so ordinarily the way it works is, Silicon Valley kind of stays off to the side, secretly maybe sides with the Democrats, but publicly is trying to be objective. But it seems like that's not going to be the case this year.
It can't. I mean, after the last election, Cambridge Analytica, how could it avoid it? How could it avoid the spotlight?
But when Elizabeth Warren kind of came out and said, "Hey, we're going to take a swing at the gig economy," I think everybody, again, you never really know how much of this is the campaign trail and how much of this is actually she's gonna do it when she gets in office. But she seems pretty serious about kind of taking on what she calls big tech.
Right. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well,
is it even doable?
Sure. I mean, I guess I think that there's a certain hypocrisy to technology companies, platform companies, saying we're going to be the glue that puts together all these conversations, but we're not going to take any responsibility. We're not publishers. I think that's running a little bit out of gas.
Yeah. And so, if we think about Facebook saying that, they're going to play this neutral card, I just think it's such a cop-out, right? They've basically come out and said that, they can't take active measures to stop content or media that is potentially false, right?
And do they use I think this is an LA Times article from October 4th, written by Evan Halper. And, the point that he makes, and I think it's pretty much right on, is, you could expect Warren to be, raising the pitchforks against big tech. But then Biden comes along and says a version of the same thing. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. One of them is probably the leader, the Democrat. So, I mean, maybe it's just where I'm sitting today, but I have trouble imagining that neither Biden nor Warren are going to end up being the nominee. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's a dark horse that comes out from behind, but they seem to be the two leading, particularly now Bernie with the health issues that he's got.
Regardless of the candidate, it's just there's such a knowledge gap in the political sphere when it comes to even understanding technology. And so, I would love to see someone try, but the combination of the arrogance of Silicon Valley and the ignorance in politics, it just, it's a mismatched thing, in my opinion.
So what do you make of Facebook saying that they are not going to stop politicians' lies and hate? This is a piece that we picked up from TechCrunch.
Like I said, I think it's just a cop-out. They want to be neutral, they want to be safe, but they're basically denying the pivotal role that they played in the last election. And so to not even say that they're going to attempt to stop it and that they just can't and won't, is so lazy. They like want to have their cake and eat it too.
All right, so play the game though, because I mean, you and I have both been in policy meetings at big companies where conversations like this come up. So you're around the conference table, Mark is sitting at the end, somebody says, we really ought to do something about all these political lies, you know, and so I would say to you, okay, Alexa, you're on point. Like, what should we do?
There's so many different layers to the complexity. I think number one, technology will not save us in the sense that this is a multi-part solution. Yes, you can have flags, moderation, etc. You can have natural language processing, that you can have a whole bunch of text signals programmed to flag fake news or corrupt media. Two, you need insiders. You need a combination of politicians, journalists, people who are trained to spot when something is fake, right? Didn't you teach a class on this?
Yeah.
Right? It's not an easy thing to do, but there are people who are better at it than your average citizen, right? And I think you want to assemble a committee of the best thinkers and get their input. Basically there's a tech component to this, there is an expertise component to it, and then there is a process component. And so if these are companies that are saying we can build self-driving cars, that we can basically defy the way the world has operated, then to actually say, oh, but we can't fix this other thing, it's antithetical to the spirit of what makes these companies great. And so I guess I'm a little pissed because they'll talk about innovation, but when it comes to solving some of the most critical problems where democracy and elections are on the line, they're basically just putting their hands up and saying, like, not our problem.
So, not to defend them, but I will say this. When I was editor-in-chief, and I've been editor-in-chief a bunch of times, stories come at you, and you say, okay, here's 20 proposals for the cover or for the lead story. I'm going to pick that one. And it's a combination of, what did we do last week? What am I seeing in the market? What can we do to be unique and different? And then it's also, to some extent, your voice as an editor and your publication's voice. If you think about what Facebook is as a publisher, it's a billion unique publications, right? So
Yep.
the Alexa feed is different than the Steve feed. We probably have some so to have, you can't have a billion editors, so you say, all right, let's teach an algorithm, and if Alexa says, hey, I really dig Fox News, what right does Facebook have to say, here, we think that this particular show on Fox News or this editorial article on Fox News represents facts inaccurately, so we're going to edit that out of Alexa's feed.
They can't stop the editing, but again, if the goal or the problem is that content is tainted, not fact first or fact checked, these algorithms are programmed already to basically group content that is more similar than it is different.
Right.
So one way to solve this is to actually reverse the logic. If someone is consuming Fox News, then they should have an algorithm serving adjacent content, asking the reader, would you like to consider a different opinion? Would you like to be presented the same article through a different lens? Just offering additional pathways to perspective will make the problem better.
Well, we are weeks away from Facebook rolling out its news tab, and one could argue that Apple, more quietly but with some consistency, has already done some of that. Their Apple News product is theoretically a little bit more nuanced, but we've got a bunch of other political things to kind of touch on. So let's talk about this idea that Amazon Alexa, not to be confused with Alexa Scordato, Amazon Alexa is going to be soon inviting users to donate to U.S. presidential candidates. I think that's fascinating.
I mean, that's fun. I just think it's just Amazon is such a money maker, right? And any friction any friction in any purchase decision, they're just trying to eliminate as quickly as possible. And so, sure, like when they rolled out those Tide Pods, like those buttons where it's like you just push a button and it reorders your detergent. It's like, for me, it's almost analogous to that. It's like, okay, like, sure.
So you'll just be able to say, Alexa, donate $25 to Joe Biden's campaign, and they'll simply send it along.
Yeah, I just think it's going to be hilarious. I just think some of the, when you have families with different opinions and kids who want to support one campaign and not the other, like, I could see this just, it's an SNL skit in the making for sure.
All right, so moving to TikTok. So TechCrunch reported that TikTok, totally opposite, is banning all political advertising.
I'm so into this.
So I see, that makes me sad because I thought so wait, let me read you the quote from TikTok. Any paid ads that come into the community need to fit the standards of our platform, and the nature of paid political ads is not something we believe fits the TikTok platform experience, said Blake Chandley, TikTok's VP of Global Business Solutions. So what they're essentially saying is all politics. So TikTok is meant to be kind of an alternate universe of fun silliness. Is that?
I think it's just like creativity. I mean, or, that's what they might be messaging, but they also might realize that they don't want to be in the position Facebook's in. They don't want the responsibility, and so they're setting a boundary before it gets bad.
All right, so one more quote from TikTok. They said that they want to be known as a place for creative expression and one that creates a positive, refreshing environment that inspires creativity. Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen some pretty damn creative, both pro and anti-Trump editorial.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that, like, even if they're keeping this stance, that there are users who will just express it or find a way to express it regardless?
I think we have to be honest about the fact that politics and entertainment are, partly because of our president, are inseparably merged together. And, the president's willingness to find random, bizarro Twitter feeds and rebroadcast them essentially blows the lid off any distinction between entertainment and news. And I think TikTok, I understand what they're trying to do, and I think you're exactly right that they're trying to avoid a problem that's kind of on the horizon. But yeah, good luck with that would be my answer. All right, so that which brings us then to disinformation, chapter 2. So the New York Times had an article late September 26th, I found the headline and then the article incredibly disturbing.
It's so disturbing.
At least 70 countries have disinformation campaigns, the study finds. And here, I'll just read you a little bit of it and then we can talk. It says, in Vietnam, citizens were enlisted to post pro-government messages on their personal Facebook pages. The Guatemalan government used hacked and stolen social media accounts to silence dissenting opinions, and Ethiopia's ruling party hired people to influence social media conversations in its favor. And, that's 3 of 70, so I assume the horror show continues. I mean, are there people speaking 70 languages sitting in San Francisco or around the world that work for Facebook trying to sort out these disinformation sources and silence them or mute them?
No, I mean, we're so ill-equipped. Facebook is taking such a passive stance within the United States, like even on our home turf, just in terms of their willingness to problem solve and eradicate disinformation. And so, it's the consequences of that. And I think this is why I feel so strongly about it. It has ramifications in other markets.
So we're back to our original conversation, which is I mean, it's essentially all these countries are using social media for disinformation, and Facebook in particular is throwing up its hands and saying, we don't want to be the arbiter of fact and fiction.
Right.
So here, I'll just, one more clip from the Times article. Quotes, social media technology tends to empower propaganda and disinformation in really new ways, said Samantha Bradshaw, a researcher at the Oxford Internet Institute at Department of Oxford University. Well, I think that maybe the question is this just a runaway train that we're going to catch up to and put some brakes on, or is this nobody can trust anything anymore, just, you know?
I think it's just going to have to be like, can private citizens take it upon themselves to be more discerning in terms of their media consumption? You know, just knowing that if you are in the context of Facebook, the content that you're served, the links that you see are potentially like dangerous, intellectually dangerous or compromised. That means that we have to actually be more active in finding news sources and judging for ourselves.
So Jack Dorsey was at TED this year, on stage, interviewed by Chris Anderson, the curator of TED, and he asked Dorsey what Twitter was going to do about fake news and misinformation on the platform, and Dorsey kind of rolled his eyes and said, "It's a really complicated question, and they're exploring it, and they're having but it was I think the audience felt it was a bullshit answer.
Yeah.
It was essentially talk to the hand, like we're not going to do anything."
Mm-hmm.
But from the standpoint of Twitter in particular, on one hand you could say, why not just shut down Trump's Twitter account? He clearly uses it to bully people. He clearly breaks the terms of service. He clearly uses it to spread misinformation and disinformation. But two things. One, I think that Twitter would be in the extraordinary danger if they were to go ahead and shut down the president of the United States. And secondly, and this is maybe the hard part to accept, Trump has made Twitter enormously relevant.
Right.
Right?
I was going to say, if they actually shut down the president's Twitter account, they might lose maybe 10% of their traffic and usage.
Yeah, and then all the people that, all the other politicians that now are forced to use
Mm-hmm.
Twitter. And so I guess the answer is this problem is outside the U.S. It's enormous. You think, and I agree, that if we think it's bad in the U.S., imagine what it's like, in countries that, are not, front burner problems for these networks, given where the revenue comes from. And maybe that's really what it comes down to, which is, I think of when I was running a company, there were problems that were client problems. There were clients that were team and product problems. And then there were problems from kind of, I don't want to say fringe, but either non-paying customers or people that didn't like something on the platform but they weren't really stakeholders. And we wrote them down.
Yep.
But we never really had the bandwidth to address them.
Mm-hmm.
Because, this time is short and the paying customer problems came first.
Yeah, I think, it's, for me, all of this boils down to, like, with great power comes great responsibility. And if you work in tech today and you're in a leadership position, humane tech, ethical tech, the implications of technology on society at large, if you are going to be passive to this, then you are going to be on the wrong side of history.
All right, so last Facebook thing, and then we'll get to the M&A stuff. So Facebook, this is a Washington Post article from actually the end of August, but it's still relevant. Facebook is requiring buyers of political ads to provide more information about who paid for them.
This is actually good news for once.
Yeah.
Yay. This makes sense, right?
It does, but I wonder how that fits into Citizens United. So if a nameless, PAC comes in and wants to buy ads, does that, how does Facebook deal with that?
In terms of the disclosure, like,
you still don't know who's behind it. You just know the name of the PAC.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's directionally correct. Obviously, it's not going to solve every single use case, but maybe that's part of what I don't know how that would work. If it is a path they might have to disclose, otherwise you can't buy.
Um,
It's like email. In order to send an email to like a list of more than 1,000 people, you have to have a business address or a name and a physical address. Otherwise, you violate email laws.
Tell me more about that. Did I miss that chapter?
Yeah, so it's like an email marketer. Like if you go to MailChimp and you set up your email campaigns, it's going to ask you, where'd you get your list? Is it opt-in? Who are you? And you actually have to disclose the name of your business and a physical address.
Right. So let's play that out in terms of Facebook. So I say I want to buy a political ad. My name is the American Institute for Freedom and Democracy. My address is 1234, P.O. Box 01234, Washington, D.C. Okay. Now, can I run the ad?
Maybe not. Who knows? If the answer is yes, then like clearly this is gonna break. But maybe there is an aspect of, okay, you need to link a verified Facebook account, like a verified Facebook profile.
So here's what the Post reports. They're saying Facebook already requires political advertisers to verify their identities starting in September, which means it's now started. The company will require buyers who are known as issue ads or advocates of political candidates to include information about who's funding the ad. To satisfy Facebook's new requirements, a business can submit a tax identification number, or campaigns can share their registration data from the Federal Election Commission, and Facebook will label them as confirmed organizations in its archive. But Facebook won't require advocacy organizations to submit more detailed information about their donors, meaning Facebook users who want to learn more about an unfamiliar sounding group must rely on the government, which does not update its campaign finance laws, which has not updated its campaign finance laws in decades. So, fail. I mean, what they're saying is we're going to do as much as the government does to identify where money comes from, but going back to Citizens United, that ship has, at least for the time being, sailed.
So,
yeah.
Okay. Now unless you just burst my
you're happy. But look, this is the topic of this entire pod, which is that A, it's complicated, B, it's got kind of a seesaw lever, and anything you push has an equal and opposite bad reaction on the other direction. So if you say the government needs to write more laws, that's going to have a bad outcome.
Yeah.
Here, I'll just give you a sidebar example that's worth telling. So a gazillion million years ago, when television was king, people began to feel like there wasn't enough local content on television. So they passed the local access ruling that said that from 7 to 8 o'clock at night, the programming couldn't come from the network. It had to come from local television stations. That would seem to, that was an FCC initiative.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember, because you were probably like 3 at the time, but what happened was syndication. So Current Affairs and Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and all of these King World kind of frothy but not particularly community relevant shows got delivered to the stations, and they put them on the air from the local stations. So essentially the government's attempt to get local stations to make local content totally failed.
Yeah.
And in fact created a time period that was theoretically for family viewing that was atrociously terrible. So hard to believe that the government could come in and pass a law that Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and YouTube and Google would live by that would make content more objective, more balanced, more fair.
Yeah. This is so depressing, Steve.
We're
talking about how tech won't fix a government that is already deeply flawed and slow and inefficient and ineffective.
All right. So now that I've gotten you riled up, we'll go to chapter 3 and you can really...
Oh, more depressing.
No. Now you get to have fun. So chapter 3 is about M&A, and there are 2 headlines here that are both important and relevant, but let's start with number 1, which is 2 companies that are merging together, but actually, as best as I can tell, it's an acquisition. Taboola is buying Outbrain. let's start by explaining for
Just
our
cash, right? Like a $300 million cash deal.
yeah. So let's start by explaining for our listeners who don't necessarily know. Taboola and Outbrain both put video stories on the bottom of publisher pages.
It's not just video; it's also just text too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's theoretically sponsored stories, and they're meant to be relevant to the page they're on. But and sometimes they are, sometimes they are, and they provide a new source of revenue for publishers, which is important, and more importantly, both Taboola and Outbrain are not Facebook or Google, or Apple. They're not, or not Apple, not relevant here, but they're not one of the big platform companies. So that gives publishers another bit of cash that they get directly. Isn't that a good thing?
You would think it's a good thing, but I definitely have been on articles online, clicked on one of these, and it's just taken me down a rabbit hole. Like it tricks you as a reader into clicking content. It's a content farm, and honestly, you would think, yes, this is great for a publishing industry that's been struggling, but I look at these two entities, Taboola and Outbrain, no offense to the people who work there, but these two organizations have contributed to this cesspool of content online. When I think about fake news, the most lowbrow, bottom of the barrel content, and how pervasive and quickly it spreads on the internet, a huge reason for the existence of that is Taboola and Outbrain. And so the merging of these two companies is just like, for me, this dumpster fire of the state of the web that we live in right now.
So they're really ads, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's sponsored content. It's not good content.
So here's the thing that I don't think people know. So I go back a long ways with Taboola. They were presenters at the New York Video Meetup back in the day. They have an initiative that's not very well known, but I went to make sure it still existed because I knew that we were going to be doing this podcast today. And they are doing a pretty interesting kind of curated, high quality news product. It's not for Apple users at this point, but as best as I understand, just for Android. And it's called Taboola News, and it I think if you look at it, and I don't have an Android phone, so you'll have to find someone to check it out. But it is high quality vertical news that really is more from news publishers than it is from ads. And I know this from speaking to the CEO. They really do believe that they now have such a footprint that they have the opportunity to do, more than just distribute content that is kind of fluffy, but also relevant and timely. So maybe these were the two kind of largest deliverers of those bottom of the page videos and articles. Maybe he's now big enough that he can actually, kind of have an editorial footprint. That would be great.
That would be great. I would actually, strategically, I'd encourage them to just rebrand it under a separate arm or something, because I feel like if they put any, disclosure with using Taboola or Outbrain on that unit, it would just be, it's so tainted in my mind. And again, I'm highly biased because I'm a marketer, and
have you ever bought ads on any of those networks?
No, definitely not. My philosophy as a marketer is like, when it comes to audience development, you can't compromise quality, right? I'm not like a paid acquisition media buyer, like big spender, in the sense that like you can't buy your way to a good story. You can't buy consumer loyalty and affinity. Like, it's something you have to earn. And so Taboola and Outbrain have always been like lazy marketing for me.
So you think there's no paid media in current marketing that's relevant?
I think the best paid media is when it's native organic content that then has additional distribution around it. That is like, but it has to be in the context of something that like matches. Like, I do think Reddit, the way they handled AMAs and sort of like sponsored content and ads, like it's a bundling that makes sense. When I look at Orange is the New Black sponsoring a New York Times article around like female incarceration, that's so smart and makes sense. Again, because like the audience, the intention, the context, it 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 fits. Taboola and Outbrain, yes, there's an algorithm. They try to make it contextually relevant, but it's also optimized for clicks, not quality.
I have so many things to say back to that, but we don't have time to dig into the future of advertising on this. So, as we often say about this point in the podcast, we're going to save that for another day, because the future of advertising, I did a whole panel at South by Southwest last year about the world of the web after advertising, and I have very strong feelings about it. So last but not least, let's talk about a headline that made its way around. There's a company in New York. They've raised $67 million. Thomas Reardon is the CEO. Control Labs is the name. And they are, at least until you dig below the surface a little bit, well, no, maybe even if you don't dig below the surface, it's pretty sci-fi what these guys do. I mean,
Yeah.
It's mind control computing.
Yeah.
And as we speak, I'll run a video that we shot at the NYC Media Lab Summit from last year, not the one just the other day, but you'll see some mind computing on the screen for those of you who are watching the podcast, not listening. But the coverage of this was pretty screechy, because the company sold last week to Facebook. And depending on who you believe, it was either $500 million or $1 billion sale. It's a lot of money for a company that raised $67 million. I mean, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. But the headline was Facebook buys mind control computing company, which freaked some people out.
Yep. It mind control in general, like regardless of context, that's probably the scariest thing.
Well, all right. So let's think about that for a second. When you say scary, you think the idea that you could text Alexa, "Hey, I'm going to be 10 minutes late to record our podcast." You think that you think that being able to think that rather than type it on a keyboard is a bad thing?
I mean, there are cool applications of it, but then when I play out all of the ways it can go wrong, then it scares me.
So again, I'm going to clarify what Control Labs is and isn't. It's not a thing on your head reading your mind. At this point, it's a sensor on your wrist that basically captures pulses of electrical information from the way you move your fingers and turns that into motion. And there's some video online. We'll put the links in the show notes of how that works. Everyone I know that's seen Reardon present or seen the demo in a small room says it's unbelievably exciting.
I think the promise of it is so exciting. Like any new technology, I'm always super optimistic. But when I think about like hacking and what bad people can do with the technology, it's so scary. Imagine you suffer from a stroke or something, and then you're using this technology to sign documents, to write emails, and then all of a sudden, like some person who has it out for you, like gets a hold of the thing, and now they can like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think.
Oh yeah, like Steve did the thing.
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, if you use DocuSign or any of those things, already your signature is a PDF. That you take a picture of it. So I think that's already kind of a.
We had a whole episode on just how tech has made things really bad, and so it's hard for me to ride the optimism train at the end, because I'm like, when this gets adopted at scale, it's just gonna turn to bad things.
So Facebook's answer to this was that Control Labs was bought for their AR VR division.
I mean, with Oculus, they bought Oculus, and so it makes sense from an M&A standpoint for sure.
That you could begin to actually, but much like, and this part of what's interesting about this is, I mean, this is super sci-fi stuff, but the idea that you could swipe your fingers in the air and the screen swaps, all the things you can now do on your phone just become behavior.
Totally. And I mean, again, I'm giving it a hard time, but if you've played PS4 and Spider-Man, the graphics, I mean, it looks like you were flying through New York City. And so the idea of flicking your wrists and like all of a sudden spider webs are shooting out and you're wearing a VR device and now you are like Spider-Man. I mean, I can see that. The future is here, and Facebook going after that technology makes so much sense.
So the last thing I'll say about the Control Labs thing, just in terms of the deal that I find fascinating, is Google had money in. There was a whole list of high-end, Amazon had money in, Google had money in. So it isn't clear to me whether it was an auction, whether or not the reason it got to be $1 billion was because Google, said, all right, if it's for sale, we'll spend 500 million, and then Amazon said we'll spend 6. But it's important to remember that Facebook hasn't bought anything since Oculus.
Right.
Anything big. I mean, their last big purchase was Oculus, which was $2 billion. So if Control Labs was $1 billion or 500 million or somewhere in the middle of that, worth paying attention to this whole computer mind control sector. And famous other name that maybe got lost in the shuffle is that our friend in Tesla,
Elon Musk,
also has a Neuro Labs product that he says he's releasing in 2020. So computer mind control. Yeah, it is the thing that is just crossed over into being part of the happening next conversation. So,
yep.
All right, with that, out of time.
What a jam-packed show.
Yeah, politics and tech, kind of a garbage fire. Sorry about that, everybody. Maybe but you know what? We should make a goal to solve it for our listeners.
Yeah, to everyone, take some responsibility. Think about how you're consuming content online and offline.
Indeed. And we will be back next week with something lighter and more frothy. Bye, Alexa.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.